You can choose through your own free will whether right now is heaven or right now is hell.
Yeah.
And I believe that the only degree of distinction, that 10-degree distinction that they speak about in Zen Buddhism, is whether you are accepting what's happening in the present moment or whether you are not.
Yeah.
Whether you are resisting it.
Yeah.
Are there things that are taboo to have gratitude for? The death of a loved one, an intense physical trauma, getting cheated on. What happens to us if we shift the perspective towards the negative experiences that happen in our lives? Who are we without these experiences? Why do we hold on to them in the first place? What if you could find gratitude in your deepest pain? My guest today is Aaron Lenihan, a high-performance men's coach and fellow truth seeker. In this episode, we dive into these questions and find out how we can take our power back from negative experiences and ultimately reclaim our sovereignty as the creators of our own lives. We share some really vulnerable stories from our past and use them as fuel for the fire of a new way of living, one that recognizes heaven or hell only exists in the present moment. It's all down to how we're viewing it, and gratitude is the path to picking. You are listening to the Heart for Life podcast with Thomas Scott. I am curious, in your work, have you explored invoking a higher power or invoking something bigger than yourself when it comes to creating a podcast or your coaching or anything along those lines?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. It's something that for myself I've kind of been like, I don't want to say in a battle with, but I guess I've had we spoke of resistance. I've even had resistance to calling to a higher power, whether you think it's God or whether you think it's source, whatever it is. To me, it's almost, I grew up not in, like, we weren't Christian, we weren't really a religious based family, but I always believed that there was something there. I always believed in a God and I prayed to a God, but it was kind of a weird relationship back and forth where when I went through some really difficult things for myself, which I think we'll talk about on this podcast, I started to doubt that. I started to doubt that higher power. And so I went through a phase of my life, we'll just call it rock bottom, where there was no faith, there was no belief in anything of this sort, no God. It was just me against me, really. And so even in the past few years that I've like kind of transcended a lot of that darkness and came to a whole new place within myself, I'm like refinding that belief, refinding that faith in higher power, in a God. And just recently, so it's cool that you asked this, just recently I've been really nailing down on this, and it's been really like magical. Like, it's just the only word I can use to describe it, I guess, like magical, beautiful, to reconnect to that thing like outside of me, that's greater than me, that's bigger than me, and to kind of surrender to something that's outside of myself and stop making it all about me.
Yeah.
Has been so powerful.
I resonate with that deeply. I was raised Catholic and in college became a full-blown atheist thanks to psychedelics and different things, which it's so interesting because like I had to break it apart to then come back full circle to the oneness of everything.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a journey. This podcast is about becoming profoundly intimate with life. And in a lot of ways, this conversation around God is a level of that intimacy. As we deepen our own intimacy into life, I imagine it calls us to ask these deeper questions of what is there? Is there something bigger than me at play? Is there a plan for my life, or is it all fucking meaningless? And from our previous discussions, you've shared that it's your personal mission to become as profoundly intimate with life as you can. And I'm curious what experiences have helped you define this view.
That's a wild question. It's awesome. So yeah, so there's been two real big turning points in my life, two big experiences that I've gone through that have really really gone to shape me and who I've become now. And so the first was, I was just getting out of high school. At this point, I was in a relationship with a girl for nearly 5 years at the time. I had life by the balls. I had the hot girlfriend. I had, a job kind of lined up. I was like, I'll be making decent money, got this hot girlfriend. We'll just live life out. We'll have kids. We'll do the house. We'll get the dog, the white picket fence, the whole 9 yards. Like everything was just set up. It was going to be beautiful. And so I was getting ready to go to college, and we were getting ready to do that like next level, move in together, go to college, really pursue a career, like make shit happen, right? And that summer before college, it was just a few weeks before. I'm kind of like just fast forwarding through this story just to get through, but I got a call from her one day, and it was that she cheated on me. And at that time, just like to be able to like look back and see it now, I'm so grateful for it, right? But at the time, I didn't see any sort of light. It was like my world was stripped away from me. It was like, as I said before, like my whole future was planned around her. Yeah. So I had essentially all of my power, all of my, just everything, my whole identity was wrapped up in this relationship with her. So she cheated on me, and this is what initially led me into personal development, because it made me look at myself and think, well, if she cheated on me, then that must mean that there's something wrong with me. And so it really made me look in the mirror. And this was the first time that I had the courage to look at myself in the mirror. And it wasn't like a positive, reassuring look in the mirror. It was like, look, you fucking idiot. Like, look what you've done. And it was a complete victim mentality that I had. It was like, woe is me. The world's out to get me. This isn't fair. This isn't cool. And so this is what led me into personal development. And so I'd spend years after that watching as much YouTube videos as I could, going through all the coaching programs, all the paid programs, like just trying to fix myself.
Yeah.
And this is ultimately what led me, when I said was like a spiritual awakening, was going through a program that I went through where a mentor of mine told me that you are not broken. And just these words, like, you are not broken. He said, you don't need to fix yourself. And the very fact of you trying to fix yourself is actually what causes that perpetuating loop of like going down the rabbit hole of fixing yourself. Like, if you believe that you need to be fixed, then you're just going to keep recreating that reality, essentially. So that was the first big turning point out of this kind of flunk that I was in. And this was probably 2 years. That's what, like, after she cheated on me, that was the rock bottom that I was really referring to.
Yeah.
And so fast forward a few years, I took this course that I was just mentioning, really turned my life around. And then I had another big, I guess you could call it a test, is kind of how I view it now, where my dad passed away. And this was, although it is much more like, I guess, more of a terrible thing to happen than getting cheated on.
Yeah.
Getting cheated on was like a bigger, it impacted me more. It almost, to me, it prepared me. It gave me an opportunity to build myself up, build like strength in myself to be able to overcome hard things, you could say. And then, so when my dad passed away, I had a very different outlook on this setback, you could say. So
yeah, the cheating's almost personal, right? It's like, what does that mean about me? I'm not good enough. Versus when a loved one passes away, it's impersonal in some ways. It's just the pain of loss.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. So my dad passing away was, it's weird to say this because I've never said this on a podcast or really to anyone. I think you're actually the only person I've ever said this to, was that in hindsight now, I'm grateful for my father's death.
Wow.
And I'm almost getting this, like, we're talking about resistance. There's a lot of resistance to saying that.
Yeah.
Because I think, a lot of people don't associate gratitude with negative things.
Yeah.
It's a very taboo topic.
Yeah.
And so,
yeah. Let's open that up.
Yeah, let's do it.
I'm really grateful for you sharing. I experience you as very courageous in doing so. What I'm hearing you share is like, you went through this really challenging time with being cheated on, which already like sets I imagine a lot of people, men or women listening, can relate to the pain of being cheated on, how that can be perceived as we are fucked up or we're not good enough or all sorts of things. And in reality, it's, from my experience, always something the other person's going through that leads them to do that.
Yeah.
And then fast forwarding to losing your dad, this idea of having gratitude for both of these things, like gratitude for being cheated on, gratitude for losing a loved one. As you said, it's almost taboo in society to speak of these things in that way. And at the same time, I imagine for you, it's really empowering, just like it is for me. I found that all of the most painful things I've experienced have ultimately been healed when I was able to find gratitude for them, when I was able to find the blessing in it. And I imagine when you say that, you're not saying like you're grateful your dad died. You're saying you can tell me, but I imagine you're saying it's a different type of gratitude. It's like you're grateful for what it's given you.
Yeah. Yeah, like as to kind of backstep of the getting cheated on is how it was originally such a terrible thing, and then later turned into being the greatest thing, like the greatest single thing that's ever happened to me in my life. Like I'm friends with this woman now, and I tell her, I'm like, thank you so much, and she still feels guilty. And
why is it that it's the greatest thing that happened to you in your life?
Because I was going down a path that was not aligned with my highest self. Like, I know that her and we were a great fit at the time, but I know that I was totally meant for more. I didn't know at the time, but now I totally fucking know. And I just know that if I was still with her, if she didn't end things with me, I surely wasn't going to end things with her.
Yeah.
And that would have led to, I'd be in a job that I hate. I can almost guarantee it. I'd probably have kids by now, and I'm not against kids, but I'm totally not ready for them. I'd probably be overweight. I'd be like I was telling her all this stuff. I was like, man, I'd be a loser. I would be. I know that I was, because when I was with her, she was my only sense of confidence. She was my only sense of like, I'm worthy of anything because I have this hot girlfriend. But I didn't have an intrinsic level of confidence or belief in myself whatsoever. It was all external. So her pulling that away from me was the best thing that ever happened to me, because it forced me to build that deep foundation, like that deep level of confidence in myself.
Yeah.
It's like, I heard an analogy before of it. You think of it as like a deep lake. Like there's, the wind blows and there's like the little ripples on the surface, but deep down inside the lake, there's a deep, deep stillness. And that's what all of that crap, going through all of that in the years after the turmoil and the rock bottom and the depression and all the stuff, the addictions that have followed that, all of that stuff ultimately led me into where I am now, where I'm at such peace with myself and life and everything. So that really set the stage for when my father died. Is I just was able to, from the start, see it with a different set of eyes, like a different perspective of not, oh my God, how did this happen to me? This is the worst thing ever. Yeah. Which I'm not going to sit here and just say I smiled through my whole death. Like, it sucked. I grieved. It really did suck. Yeah. But I was able to look at it as, what am I going to be able to take from this situation to grow? Yeah.
So what I'm hearing is, in finding gratitude, essentially taking ownership for what happened with your girlfriend, your ex-girlfriend, and the cheating, it sets you up to be able to handle an even more challenging, arguably, experience in your life, because you, instead of letting it beat you and bring you down, you found empowerment through it. And I imagine what I'm hearing you share is that the same experience is happening with your dad, where when you find empowerment in that experience, which could be a very disempowered experience, it's super fucking painful. I'm so blessed I have not gone through that yet. I know it will happen, but I haven't gone through it. And when it does, I pray that I go through it with gratitude, love, and courage, and know that it does bring more empowerment, because it's a fact of life. Everybody will die. And so ultimately the theme here is, when we have gratitude, when we can find gratitude for the really painful things that we are experiencing, we own them. We bring them home, so to speak. And in doing so, we get to up level. We get to go to the next thing. And instead of having the shit that happens in life knock us off, it actually elevates us to the next stage and the next stage and the next stage. And I feel like I see that mirrored in a lot of the people that I emulate in the world. They often talk about the absolutely atrocious things that have happened in their life, and how those things, in a lot of ways, were the catalysts to them becoming great. And if we know that at the core, then the name of the game is, how quickly can we start to have gratitude for all of the perceived shit, for all of the perceived negative things, to know that they are actually supporting us regardless of what it is, no matter what it is. And I've been on that path myself for quite some time, finding gratitude for all of the stuff that at first in my life I thought really sucked. So like your story about getting cheated on reminded me of my first girlfriend. I was in high school and we had just had sex for the first time. We were madly in love. Like I had given my heart all the way to this girl, and we had sex, and it was we had no idea what we were doing. It was totally like a mess. And I had used I feel so shy sharing this on the podcast, but I had used a condom that had spermicide in it. You know what that is? It's like the chemical on it. And she had an allergic reaction to it, but I didn't know what that was at the time. We were 15, I think. We were young, really young. And so we both were freaking out because we didn't know we'd heard about STDs and we'd heard about pregnancy, of course, but we weren't educated. And so she was sharing this with her friends. Like she was like, like this is blah, blah, blah. And her friend's like, is it an STD? And I was freaking out and I'm like, oh my God, is it an STD? And her mom overheard the conversation and I called her phone that night because I was in a full panic and her mom picked up. And I asked if my ex was there and she was like, don't you ever fucking call this house again. And I was like completely shocked. And I was like, what's going on? And she's like, you know exactly what's going on. And I was like, does she have an STD? And the mom goes, she better fucking not have an STD. Like totally lost her shit on me. I was like 15 years old. First time I'd had sex. I was deeply in love. And it was the most traumatic thing I had ever experienced because the mom said I was never allowed to talk to her again. And she fucking meant it. And so this woman that I was deeply in love with, like I was like gonna marry this girl. I had her, the first night we'd had sex, had her ripped away from me. Just completely, painfully, brutally ripped out of my life. And I was not allowed to talk to her at all. And her parents let my parents know. And it was like, it was fucking painful. And I remember grieving that like the death of somebody. It really felt like someone died because it felt like the closest person in my life had died. And man, the pain from that lasted for years and years and years. Like 4 years, I was in the grieving of that. And it was only recently that I realized I hadn't let it go. It was like 2 years ago. I was in like some spiritual healing session as I do. And I noticed I was still holding on to the love of my first love. And I had to let it go. And in doing so, I found deep gratitude for that whole experience. Same as you. It was like overwhelming gratitude for one, just the experience itself, like the amount of pain, like getting to feel that level of pain is actually a miracle. Because the opposite experience of that is the emptiness of nothing. And to the depth we can feel pain is to the depth we can feel joy, to the depth we can feel gratitude, to the depth we can feel love, happiness, excitement, peace, all these things. And that's one of the miracles of these deep, painful emotions is they show us how deeply we can actually feel any one of the emotions. And so what that led me to was finding a philosophy, like moving through that pain was helped me find a philosophy called Stoicism, which we intended to talk about here. And particularly this concept of amor fati, which, as you know, I've got tattooed here on my shoulder. I believe you have an amor fati tattoo. Yeah. So this concept's really personal to us. And amor fati means love fate, as you know, but for the listener. And the way I experience the concept of loving fate is it's about loving the present moment, loving whatever happens to us. So these deep, painful experiences, loving them as a part of life. And I'm curious how this concept of amor fati has helped you, as well as how has Stoicism itself helped you in regards to these deeper things, like finding gratitude for the painful moments.
Yeah. So amor fati for me, I got the tattoo after my dad died.
Wow.
That was my big thing. So actually it was my dad's death which led me into Stoicism. So like I was already into personal development, already into like slight spirituality. And it was pretty much the same time as my father's death, I stumbled across Ryan Holiday's work, read a lot of his books, and started to study Stoicism. And that was when this whole concept of accepting the unacceptable and realizing that we don't have power over what happens to us, but we have the power to choose our attitude towards it. Like is when I found Stoicism, and it all just made so much sense. Like all of it. I'm like, oh my God, this is exactly what I needed to hear. This is exactly what the relationship ending and getting cheated on is. It's what it all led into. And so just that phrase, amor fati, which I'm just looking at right now on my wrist, I have amor fati and memento mori, which just means remember that you will die. Just the both of them. Love your fate. And to me, it's not just like, oh, like just love your fate. It's to literally love everything that happens to you, including the bad, including the terrible, because of the simple fact that we have the option to choose the meaning that those things give to us.
Yep, there it is.
And I find gratitude amongst like the most chaotic moments in life is what gives you the power back. It's what brings the ball back into your court to be able to choose how you're going to move forward. Whereas like victimhood, for example, like the opposite is when something happens to you and you put your power outside of you. You say like, this person did me wrong, or God did me wrong, or this unexpected event happened, but then the power is outside of you. So there's nothing that you can do. Like you can't take control. So it's, I think, loving your fate, taking radical responsibility for fucking everything that happens, whether you caused it or you didn't. And I think that this concept can really be like a launching ground for spiritual awakening.
100%. Yeah. Yeah. So in your perspective, how do you accept the unacceptable?
So I just want to point out that's actually a quote by Eckhart Tolle is, accepting the unacceptable is the greatest seed of grace in this world, I believe is how he said it. So how do I accept the unacceptable? I think the unfortunate answer, I guess, for me was just that I had to, I don't want to say I had to, but it took me hitting rock bottom and like transcending that, coming out of that, in order to be able to have the perspective that, like, I always say this, the deeper the trench, the higher the peak. Like the lower that you fall down, the lower that you get shit on, it's basically the better it's going to feel once you get above that and you can see above it. So I think just that perspective of knowing that, like, you know, I still have tough days. Like, I know there's still very shitty things that are going to happen to me, but realizing, like I said, the ball's in my court. I have the option to decide. And one of my favorite quotes of all time was Viktor Frankl. And he said, everything can be taken from a man, but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, and that is the right to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances.
Wow.
I kind of butchered that, but that is one of my favorite quotes. Like, we have the right to choose our attitude, no matter what. I mean, like, this is a guy that went through, like, you know who he is. He went through the Holocaust, concentration camps, had his whole family taken from him and killed. And that's what he came up with. Like, you know, I'm not trying to compare things, but like it's truth, right? Like we can decide.
I imagine it's one of the things that people resonate with around even a guy like Jesus, who was saying something similar, where he's like, look, you get to choose how you respond to the pain. Like, this guy's getting tortured at the highest degree by being crucified. Like, that was the reason the Romans came up with that, was because of the unbearable pain. I don't know if you know this about crucifixion, but when they do the thing where they nail your hands to the cross and then they nail your feet, they would spread it apart just enough that you'd have to use your tiptoes to get a breath, because they have your hands actually suspended more like this, and over time the weight of your own body would make it too hard to keep breathing. And so in order to get a breath, you actually have to push up with your feet on your tiptoes and then sink back down. And the pain from pulling on those, that spot right there also caused like excruciating pain. And the point there was that the way you died from crucifixion was actually suffocation, which is fucking wild. And this dude was saying during that, like, I forgive all of you. Like, hey, this is cool. Like we're good. I love you all. And his perspective towards it was one of love and forgiveness for all of the people that were perpetrating it. And whether you believe whatever Jesus' relationship is to you personally, the listener, it's similar to this concept that Viktor Frankl's talking about. We get to choose how we respond to the pain in our life. And that response either makes it suffering, for me, which is victimhood, or just something that we're growing through and something that's going to elevate us to the next level. And in doing so, we get to bring our power back home from the experiences, and life stops being something that's happening to us and becomes something that's happening for us.
Yeah.
And I found that practice of having gratitude, I can look back at all of the perceived shitty things in life and hold the highest gratitude for them. Like, even this whole podcast has been an exercise of that, because I'm oftentimes finding myself sharing the stories of my pain, perceived pain. And in reality, on the other side, it's the greatest gift I've had. Even our first podcast together, I shared for the very first time how I did porn and all of the fucked up stuff that's happened since then. And I, on my first episode of this podcast, share that story in depth as a way to own it and have gratitude for it. And to, instead of letting it set me up in terms of like, oh, poor me, all these negative things happened that I didn't expect to happen. It's more like, no, I'm going to own the shit out of that. I did that. It was dumb as hell, but ultimately it's been the greatest gift that I have experienced, bar none.
Yeah, I think... sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I was just going to say, I think just sharing that story is so powerful. Like,
yeah. Well, what you said at the beginning of this was this idea that there's a taboo around having gratitude for these types of experiences. And I agree with you on it. There's like a collective lie that society as a whole is buying into, that we're victims. Don't take that away from us. Look at all these bad things happening. Look at the politicians doing these bad things to us. We're poor us, like the world, the earth, everybody's hurting the earth. It's a victim mentality of everything. And gratitude, I imagine, is a taboo to have because it robs us of a victim mentality.
Mm-hmm.
Do you relate to that?
Yeah, I just think it's like, it's almost funny saying it the way you're saying it, because I agree. Like, people need an enemy. They need something to complain about, and it's all ego. It's all attachment to something. So, yeah, I think, yeah, I'm with you. I'm with you 100%.
Well, so where I think we can take this is unpacking the benefits. Like, we've been unpacking the benefits of having gratitude for the perceived shit. But I think there's a step before gratitude that needs to happen. I don't imagine that your dad passed away and you were just like, thank God, thank you. Like, oh my God, this is great. Like, it's to find the gift in it, we first need to feel it all the way. We first need to allow ourselves to experience it in its complexity, in its negative shit, in its pain. But not become victims of the pain, not become attached to the pain.
Yeah.
And I'm curious how that resonates for you.
Yeah.
Like, there's a step before gratitude, and I'm curious for you, what is that?
Yeah, that's one thing that I'm a big proponent to, feeling the fuck out of whatever comes up, like feeling it to the fullest. And I said earlier that was my favorite quote, but another one of my favorite quotes is the Stan Groff quote, where he says the fullest expression of an emotion is the funeral pyre of that emotion.
Wow.
Meaning that it's almost like this like 80-20 rule. Like if you only can let yourself feel like 80% of an emotion, and there's like a 20% resistance to not fully feeling it. So you're kind of having this internal conflict, this battle of feel it, don't feel it, feel it, don't feel it. And like, I think it's especially an issue for men fully feeling emotions. But I think if you don't allow yourself to fully feel it, what you resist persists. So that is always going to be in the background. There's still going to be this like undercurrent of that emotion that you never let yourself fully feel. And I think it takes fully expressing it. Like he says, the full expression of it is the funeral pyre of it. Like feeling it fully is the only way that you can get to the other side of it. And I think that was difficult for me after losing Dad. Like, you know, I'm a guy. It is hard to cry sometimes. I really struggled with it. And I remember I'd even like call my friends. Like it'd be like, I don't know, a month or two after he passed away. I'm like, I cried for the third time today. Like, yeah, to me, like,
yeah,
it was really hard. And I had to, and I still have to, we're coming on 2 years this month after he passed, which is bizarre to say, but I still get in phases where I have to like look through pictures of him and like really let myself feel it, really allow myself to like get into that place. And the interesting thing is on the other side of it is always like a boost, like a level up of like a release, weight off my shoulders. Like that emotion is residing somewhere in your nervous system. And I think a lot of people are just ignorant to the fact that of this. They're ignorant to the fact that like, you know, if I just don't feel it, then it'll just go away kind of thing. Yeah. And that people don't realize that it's really a lot of stuff's going on beneath the surface that's really influencing and impacting every other area of our lives.
Yeah. Well, and if we avoid feeling it, inevitably circumstances and events will be attracted to us that force us to feel it. And if we hide that, it's going to be louder and louder and louder in our external reality. And so I agree with you. I love listening to Aubrey Marcus talk from time to time. And one of the things he talks about is you got to feel it to heal it.
I like that.
And I imagine that there is a union or a synergy between gratitude for feeling the deep emotions and actually allowing ourselves to feel them all the way. Because if we're perceiving something as negative or that it's pain or that it's wrong, we resist it. There's a like protection that comes over. It's like almost as if the negative emotion is attacking us on some degree, and we get into like a fight or flight mode and try to move away from it, especially as men. I find myself constantly checking in on if I'm allowing myself to feel the emotions of what I'm experiencing, or if I'm like up here in the head. And there's tons of value to being up here, but as you said, if the stuff gets trapped down in our body, there's so much research coming out now about how emotions get stored in the body. Like there's even the book, The Body Keeps Score, which is very, very popular. And this isn't, I don't believe it's taboo anymore to say that we can and do store our emotions in our bodies. And as we store those emotions, there's a price to be paid for it. If you don't feel it now, you're going to feel it later in some form of dis-ease, like the lack of ease in the body. It will manifest in all sorts of ways. And so the name of the game for me these days is to allow myself to feel these things all the way and have gratitude simultaneously. And sometimes it's hard to hold both, but there's a gratitude of like, wow, I get to feel this fucked up thing. That's all I need to allow myself to go in. And then on the other side, as you said, there's always a breakthrough. And that breakthrough might take some time. It might take a lot of time. As you said, it could take years. Like this pain, these wounds don't necessarily just heal up. Oftentimes they stay with us for many, many years. And at the same time, they're such a blessing. That grief that you feel for your father shows you to the depth that you loved him. Because, I've had people in my life pass away that I don't grieve regularly at all. Like I had grief when they passed away, and then we were just mild acquaintances. So it's like, I don't think about them anymore. And that shows me that I didn't love that person very deeply, versus the grief that I imagine you experienced for your dad shows you how much you loved him. And there's a blessing in it, because it's like, okay, if I know that I love this person this much, who else is like that in my life? And do I need to wait for some traumatic thing to happen for me to realize that? Do I need to wait to rebuild that connection with my parents? Do I need to wait to tell my friend that I love him when he's on his fucking deathbed? Do I need to wait until it's too late? Or can I allow myself to feel the level of love or joy or bliss that is in connection to this other human being at the depth that I can feel the grief? And this is like, for me, this is the edge or the pinnacle of where I'm at right now on my personal development journey. Is like, as men, I say as men a lot, I imagine this applies to everybody. We're all really good with suffering. We're all really good at holding pain. We're all really good at holding stress, sadness, guilt, anger, like shoving that shit down, holding it, toughing it out, because that's what society asks of us. What I don't experience a lot of people being good at is being good at holding the higher emotions, like holding love, holding gratitude, holding joy, and allowing ourselves to experience another human being all the way. Because what it asks of us is actually more challenging oftentimes than what's being asked of us to feel the grief or to feel the anger. Because it's asking us to open ourselves deeper. In order to love somebody really fully, I got to open up aspects of myself that I have not let anybody see. In order to feel bliss at a really high degree, I've got to be comfortable with negative shit happening in my life. Because if bliss can only come when all of the stars align up perfectly and there's nothing wrong and the breeze is perfect and the temperature's right and the light is great. And, yes, those moments happen and they're miraculous, but then I'm waiting my whole life for one or two times when everything's perfectly aligned. Whereas, can I hold bliss or love or joy right now on this podcast with you? Can I hold the expression of gratitude so high, even if there's a fucking digger right outside my window right now making so much noise and I'm like, why is this happening on this podcast? And at the same time, I'm like, okay, but am I going to let that diminish my joy? Am I going to let that diminish my ability to shine really, really bright here, right now, and to love you and to love everyone listening and to love myself at a degree that is comparable to the grief that we can feel or the pain that we can feel when these really painful things happen in our life?
Wow. Very nice said.
Thank you.
Yeah, I love that. And I just wanted to just quickly pick on the one thing you said of how, like, from my experience, losing my dad, it made me realize how much more it really put in perspective the impermanence of life. Like, it really helped me realize that, like, holy shit, everyone that I love is going to die, including myself. And that just, people are very quick to try and turn away from that reality. And like, even death is a very taboo topic. And so for me to accept that fact, accept that everyone's gonna die, whether I like it or not, it's gonna happen. So it has really made the connections that I do have with people just that extra bit of special. The connection with my mom, the connection with my brother, my closest friends, and my family. Yeah. And aside from just my connections with friends, even just my connection, like the beginning of this podcast, with life, like my intimate connection with life and just experiences and everything. And so that's why I've said before of like how these really tough things can happen to us, but they can also be like the launching ground to spiritual awakening, because it opens us up to this potentiality of like every moment is actually beautiful if you let it. Like there's a Zen Buddhist saying that heaven and hell are only 1/10 of an inch apart.
Yeah.
And I fucking love that.
Yeah. Yeah. That's such a beautiful quote. And I think it speaks really perfectly to what we're talking about right now. I had this idea recently that I imagine is another taboo idea in the world of religion. And I haven't heard a lot of people talk about this, although I imagine I'm not the only one who feels this way. Time doesn't exist. It's fake, as we can see in quantum physics. So if we take these ancient concepts of heaven or hell, they can only be applied to the present moment, period. Mm-hmm. They can only exist right now. And you, listener, me, speaker, you, Aaron, getting to experience this moment, you can choose through your own free will whether right now is heaven or right now is hell.
Yeah.
And I believe that the only degree of distinction, that 10-degree distinction that they speak about in Zen Buddhism, is whether you are accepting what's happening in the present moment or whether you are not.
Yeah.
Whether you are resisting it.
Yeah.
And whatever the fuck is happening, if you resist it, it doesn't feel great.
Yeah.
You're in hell. You're saying it's wrong. You're saying that there's some external circumstance that is bigger than you, that you are not powerful enough to overcome, that you have no choice, that you are all of these stories. And when we choose fully and accept fully all that is being experienced, it then becomes heaven. We become the creator. We become the idealized self. Mm-hmm. And then we can start to see the beauty all around us.
Yeah. 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 I think I'm not going to like go deep into like the religion thing, but I think this is a common, a falsification, if you would, of Christianity, of people believing that heaven is in the afterlife, that heaven is something that you be a good man or a good woman and you do right by God, and when you die, you will go to heaven. But to go to what you said, is my belief as well, is that there's no heaven, there's no hell. It's, are you living heaven on earth, or are you living hell on earth? Yeah. Like if you commit a tragedy, no sin goes unnoticed to the degree that like you're going to feel it now. Like if you just like an absurd example, if you murder someone, like you are going to be living a hell on earth. And, or the opposite is true. Like you can experience
and that
a heaven.
That hell comes from your own experience of shame and guilt and anger and hiding and all these kinds of things, that the abandonment of society, these types of things. So that's where the hell comes from. And as we continue to live in hell, it continues to perpetuate in the world around us. And we can see how many people are living in hell because of the shit that's happening on the planet at this time. But to that degree, we can also see the people that are living in heaven because the planet hasn't destroyed itself. We haven't lost it all. And so the ways that I believe people can make radical change on the planet right now in this present moment is to view the world around you as blessed, as beauty, as deep gratitude for it. And I imagine in order to get to that point, there's a step that needs to happen, and that step is called forgiveness. Because if we're holding resentment towards anybody, if we're holding a hatred or a victim mindset, the only way to get out of a victim mindset is to take your power back. And for me, the fastest, most efficient, most effective way to take my power back in any situation is to forgive. If someone has done me wrong, the faster I forgive them, the faster I take my own power back, because it says I'm not a victim of that situation. And I'm curious, what is your relationship to forgiveness, and how do you imagine it moves you out of victim mentality?
I love this question. I love this topic. I love what we're getting into. I'm fired up. Forgiveness is interesting. And I think there's two different, like there's forgiveness to others or forgiveness even to ourselves. So I think forgiveness is so powerful because one thing that I think is a misconception with forgiveness is that you're making the other person right. But I don't think that's necessarily, it doesn't have to be the case. And I think what's interesting is that the forgiver, the person doing the forgiving, gains more than the person being forgiven, which is what I think is why forgiveness is so powerful, and what I think people are often have this other idea of forgiveness. And back to what we were talking about before, is that once you forgive, then it gives back the power and gives you that, you take responsibility of it. You then have that degree of like willingness to then flip the script, I guess, if you wanted to say it. And for myself, how I forgive other people is just the notion or the idea that hurt people hurt people.
Yeah.
And so I choose to let go of resentment and to let go of bitterness towards people who are operating at a lower level of consciousness than I am. Because I know that if someone tries to hurt me, I know it's because they are already experiencing pain. And so I see that it's pointless to add to that pain, to add to that drama, because I think like trying to get back at someone, I don't think it does anything besides just entertain both of our egos. So I love like Jesus said, forgive those, for they know not what they do.
Yeah. Yeah. It reminds me of a story that happened right after I did Bufo Alvarius, which in the podcast right before this one, I share my story about doing Bufo. Do you know what Bufo is?
I don't know.
Bufo is a toad venom that you smoke, and the main tryptamine in it is dimethyltryptamine, DMT, which I imagine you've heard of DMT. It's called the God molecule. Bufo has that and like, I believe 21 other unmapped tryptamines. So it's essentially the Mount Everest of all psychedelics. Bufo is the very pinnacle of a psychedelic experience that you can have on this planet, at least that I know of. And I did Bufo in 2020, and I shared that story previously. But the result of that experience led me down a really mystical path. And one of the mystical things that happened is I realized I needed to apologize to everybody I had ever wronged in my entire life. And I had gotten this message that was like, apologize to everybody you have ever wronged, no matter how impossible it might seem. And I started thinking through all the people I had wronged, and I had a list of like 2 or 3 where I was like, yep, I really fucked up on that. And so I immediately went and apologized to that. And it was pain, like it was hard to do. These were big things that I had done that I was like really ashamed for. Owned it hard, and it was really beautiful, but I knocked that out in like a day or 2. And I was like, that can't be the answer to this whole mystical thing. Like it said, no matter how impossible it might seem. This was like a message from my DMT trip. I was like, that wasn't impossible at all. And so I started like racking my brain of anybody else I had wronged. And what came through were every single person that I felt had wronged me.
Wow.
I realized I needed to apologize to them. Every single person. I apologized to the guy who took all of my porn. I shared this experience in my first podcast. The guy who took all of my porn and blackmailed me with it, to all of my investors, to the news, to all of these people in my life. I apologized to people who had really betrayed me in friendships, because I realized my role in that interaction. To say that life is one-sided and that we are not responsible for things that happen, well, the ownership is I chose that. I chose all of those things out of pain. And in reality, I can thank that individual many years later, of course, for helping me see that. And also in doing it, it's a ruthless way to take your power back. Like you said, there's a aspect of forgiveness that's extremely selfish. Where it's like, when I forgive this guy, it's a fuck you to him with love. It's like, you can't take anything from me ever again. Forgiveness can be firm. It can be tough. It can be empowered and emboldened. And in apologizing to everybody that I thought that had wronged me, I took my power back from every single one of them. Every single person that I was like, that person did this fucked up thing to me. I'm like, here's what I did wrong. And I shared it with them. I was like the guy who I shared in my podcast about him blackmailing me, I sent him an email and was like, man, I am so sorry that I didn't see the pain you were going through. I am so sorry that I fired you without giving you a heads up and talking to you human to human. I know you were struggling at that time, and I can see how that struggle led you to the path that you were on. And I'm fucking sorry for not being a better friend. And I hope you forgive me. I said that to the guy that tried to destroy my entire life. And in doing so, it helped me heal. I never heard back from him. He never responded to me. But some people that I did that with, we're now friends. It like healed on a really, really deep level, and it allowed us to actually have a deeper friendship. And a lot of people, when I was doing it, I had this very funny experience of like, I had some investors and different people that I had really negative experiences with that I wrote and apologized to. And they were like, are you okay? Because I was like, just out of the blue, reaching out, apologizing, after we had all of this like stuff. Yeah. And in some ways the answer was, I'm the best I've ever been. And in others, it was like, I'm having a total spiritual and mental breakdown at the moment, but what a blessing.
Yep.
And at the root, I think this forgiveness piece is about ownership and our role. And that's how it allows us to take back our power from being victims.
Yeah, that's powerful. To be able to apologize for people that done you wrong. Like, you never hear of that. It's bizarre.
I can't recommend that practice enough. If you can think of anybody in your life right now that you are like, man, fuck that person. They did this thing. Find where you can take ownership right now. And then go apologize for it. And see how your life, like, it just, it's like a breath of fresh air. You are not holding that anymore. Mm-hmm. And when not holding it, you're not attracting it again in a new form at another point in time.
I love it.
And then we can thank every single person that has ever done us wrong. Because we're like, oh shit, thank you for showing me where I allowed myself to be disempowered. Mm-hmm. Thank you. I will take that power right back. That's mine.
Yeah.
What a blessing. Thank you for holding it for me for however long I let you hold it for. It's mine. I claim it back, and we'll make that, I'm now more powerful. I have just owned more of my power that for whatever reason was taken from me as a child or lifetimes or whatever you believe. Societal conditioning.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a beautiful exercise. And I'm just right now thinking about like one example of that I'm going to do for myself.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I feel like I've been putting it off for a while, and I feel like it's something I definitely need to do.
Yeah. It enables our victimhood.
Yeah.
It's like, if you hold on to that, like, that person did that thing to me, you're saying like, I'm a victim. Don't take that from me. Let me be disempowered. And it's like, fuck that. Fuck that. When I saw it from that lens, I'm like, oh my God, thank God I found this out. Like, let me go do this with everybody I can.
Thank God for good drugs.
Yeah. Amen. Yeah. Bufo is one of those, like, I don't know if I said this on that podcast, but I don't recommend it to anybody. It's a calling, period. It's something that comes to you when the time's right. Don't seek it out, because it is, it took me 2.5 years to integrate it. Like, I couldn't do any psychedelics for, well, more than that, 3 years. 3 years before I even was able to smoke a puff of weed.
Wow.
Because it would just launched me into space so far. To get back into grounding took quite a bit.
Yeah.
And it shows you a lot of work you got to do. A lot of areas where you need to do some cleanup. And if you don't do that cleanup, life gets even harder because you've seen it now, and then you're hiding from it, and It's a whole bunch of
then it almost causes more kerfuffle if you can see it and you
100%.
know it now. Now you're aware of it, and you're still
then
not.
the self-betrayal becomes huge.
Yeah, I haven't done it
So-
any like crazy, say like DMT or anything. I've heard of it and I'm totally interested, but for myself, it's just been mushrooms.
Yeah.
And
But DMT is a little bit different than Bufo. They're
Okay.
both the same active ingredient, and ayahuasca. All three of them have DMT. Bufo just has this whole cocktail of a bunch of other stuff that we don't even know. A whole bunch of other like unmapped psychedelics in it. And so when you take synthetic DMT, you're just getting a pure, clean DMT. And on Bufo, it's this like, oh my God, like way different experience.
Wow.
So yeah, but to bring this whole thing home, I want to conclude it with how to apply these same concepts to ourselves, because it's one thing to forgive others, but if we're still holding shit against ourselves, that in a lot of ways I have found in my own life sets me back even further than the shit I hold against other people. Because if I'm like being my own bully, or if I'm holding my own stuff over my own head, I'm literally setting myself up for failure. And so I think the very first person to apologize to that we have wronged is ourselves.
Yeah.
And I'm curious how in your perspective have you found the ability to forgive yourself, and have you found the ability to forgive yourself for all of the shit that you've done?
Yeah. I have, and my answer to this might be a little strange, but I think it goes back to the memento mori, and to go back to just realizing that we're going to die someday.
Yeah.
And almost to take like the grand perspective of like, if you zoom out far enough, we're just a speck of dust in the cosmos of everything. And that like far out perspective, it's like, okay, are your problems really that real? Like they're kind of just surreal. Mm-hmm. And if we go to like, even to touch us on like spirituality, my belief is that we are incarnated as humans in this experience on earth, and our higher self has this interesting way of providing us with problems to overcome, to awaken to our higher self, to awaken to the reality, to awaken out of the dream of thought. And this anyway, so that's like far gone stretch answer.
It's really well stated.
Mm-hmm.
It's really well stated. I resonate with it. I imagine while it's abstract, it's still like, I understood it completely.
Awesome. Yeah. I think, and to like bring it down more to like the physical, is just, I don't want to be the 85, 90, like whatever age I get to. I don't want to be on my deathbed and look back and have regrets. And I don't want to be that and like look back and be like, oh, I wish I just forgave myself back then, or I wish I just forgave that person, or I've been like holding on to this fucking thing for so long. Why? Like, why? Yeah. Because I was scared to confront it, or because I this or that or the other reason?
Yeah.
It's like, I want to just be totally content with the belief with myself that I just put all my cards on the table and I played my hand the best that I could.
Yeah.
And just go out with that, if that answers that question at all.
It's very beautifully stated. Very beautifully stated. And I resonate with it deeply. And I imagine it, at the fundamental level, is the distinguisher between whether we're in heaven or hell. Because even if you look at it from a religious perspective, the idea of what takes you to heaven or hell, from the Christian perspective at least, is if you have the forgiveness of God. And how can God give you forgiveness? Well, you are God at the end of the day. So it only comes from forgiving yourself. So when we are not forgiving ourselves, we are in hell.
Yeah.
And when we are forgiving ourselves and we are having gratitude for our experience, we're in heaven.
Yeah.
And we punish ourselves whenever we do something that we perceive as wrong, negative, bad, you name it. And that punishment is what perpetuates suffering.
Yeah.
And so it's got to start with the self, and it's got to start with forgiveness. And there's so many places we could go with this. I want to open forgiveness like way, way more, but I think we got to save it for another podcast. But to close this one, I want to ask you a question that I imagine will be really beautiful for the listener to hear, which, if we're both aligned with this idea that heaven or hell can only come from the present moment, and it's really a relationship to ourselves that then is mirrored in the external world around us, I'm curious, what is your vision of heaven? What is your vision, highest vision of the world? Or what is your vision for the world to make it a more beautiful place?
I love that. I just want to point out, so you gave me a list of questions just to review and ponder. And I kind of jotted down little ideas for each one. And then I seen this one and I'm like, I didn't even think about it. I'm like, I'm just going to wait for the moment and just kind of see what comes up.
Yeah. Yeah. Feel it from the heart. Speak it from love.
Yeah. I think you just said the word. My highest vision is just to love life, to love others, to love myself as deeply and as potently as I possibly can. And I think everything we've spoken to coming up to this, of the forgiveness, the gratitude, the overcoming difficult, like all of this stuff, I think is like almost a pyramid leading to the tip being just love, and just love for all, just everything. And so I guess just my greatest or my highest vision for the world is just for people to wake up out of their dream, wake up out of the dream of thought. And one thing I just wanted to touch on, I have this note, is that like some of the greatest avatars in history, if we think of like Christ, Buddha, Krishna, they all said that error is due to ignorance. And some people literally just don't have the capacity to see beyond their limited worldviews and their negative behaviors. And another way is just like Socrates said that everyone chooses only what they believe to be the good. So to wrap up kind of all of this, to forgive others, to love others, is sometimes just to realize that some people might not forgive you back or love you back. And that is like the unconditional part of love, is just to love them anyway.
Yeah. And
not expect it back, but just choose to come from a place of love and just hold that space and create that space for yourself. And then it just, if anything, you're going to love it and they will hopefully pick up on it. But if they don't, that's their life.
That's very beautifully stated, my friend. Thank you. And I imagine we could all hold love for that vision of humanity and use it to bring a little more love into our own hearts. And in doing so, bring about just a little more heaven into the world around us. So, Aaron, it's been a pleasure. Thank you, my friend, for joining me today. And I want to thank you, the listener, for joining us as well on this journey. And I'll catch you next time on the Heart for Life podcast.
Awesome. Thanks, man.